Sir, step away from the water right now, or I'm calling the police for trespassing.
Her voice shook with rage, expensive perfume clashing with the fresh mountain pine as the HOA president blocked my path to the lake. Ma'am, you're threatening to arrest me for using water I own every drop of. This is my family's 3,100-acre mountain lake, passed down through a 1923 deed signed by President Calvin Coolidge himself. I'm holding the original document right here. Behind her illegal gate, hundreds of multi-million-dollar waterfront homes, all built by people who never bought the water rights they assumed were theirs. She's parked in her spotless white BMW, waving her HOA badge like it trumps century-old federal law. She doesn't know one quiet title lawsuit from me could strip every homeowner of lake access. Forever. They bet my family would never return. They were wrong. Tell me what you would have done in the comments, because what happened next changed everything. My name is Ezra Callahan, and I'm a third-generation land surveyor who thought he was inheriting peace and quiet. Instead, I inherited a war. My great-grandfather Thomas bought this land in 1923 during the mining boom. 3,100 acres of pristine mountain wilderness surrounding what the locals now call Lake Serenity. Back then, it was just Thomas Callahan with a government deed, mineral rights, and most importantly, water rights to every drop that touched his property. The morning mist still rises off that mirror-smooth water like it did a century ago. You can hear the soft lapping against granite shores, smell the sweet mix of pine needles and mountain air so clean it almost burns your lungs. When the loons call across the valley at dawn, it echoes like nature's own cathedral bell. After my divorce, I thought I'd found salvation. I'd just gone through hell, lost the house, lost half my surveying business, lost my confidence in pretty much everything. 20 years of marriage dissolved in lawyer fees and bitter arguments. This inheritance felt like a lifeline back to who I used to be before the legal nightmare. What I didn't expect was meeting Cordelia Ashworth and her army of regulations. See, back in the 1980s, a developer called Magnus Properties started building luxury cabins around the lake's perimeter. Beautiful homes, I'll admit, million-dollar views with private docks and manicured lawns rolling right down to the waterline. By the 1990s, they'd incorporated the Serenity Shores Homeowners Association with 127 homes and monthly fees of $340 per household. Fast forward 30 years, 847 homeowners paying into a community that averages $1.2 million per property. These aren't weekend cabins anymore. We're talking about a full-blown luxury enclave where the average household income hits six figures and everyone drives cars worth more than most people's houses. Then there's Cordelia herself. 59 years old, perfectly styled silver bob that never seems to move in mountain wind, always clutching an iPad like it contains the nuclear codes. She drives a white BMW X7 with vanity plates reading Serenity 1, because apparently subtlety died the day she moved here from Connecticut. Cordelia's been HOA president for 8 consecutive years. Before that, she was a corporate HR director, which explains her love of power and her famous 47-page Community Standards Manual that covers everything from acceptable mailbox colors to approved dog breeds. The crunch of fresh gravel under my truck tires should have been my first warning that morning. Instead of great-grandfather's old dirt access road, I found a brand-new electronic gate with keypad, security cameras, and a guard shack that definitely wasn't there in 1923. "Sorry, sir, this is private property," the security guard told me. Kid couldn't have been more than 19. HOA members only. That's when Cordelia materialized. Her designer heels clicking on fresh asphalt as she approached my beat-up Ford. Her eyes narrowed as she took in my appearance. Flannel shirt, weathered jeans, steel-toed boots still caked with mud from my last surveying job. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the public access point 30 miles south," she said, voice dripping with that particular brand of condescension reserved for people she deemed beneath her community's standards. "We've had issues with certain undesirable elements." Undesirable elements. The smell of her expensive perfume couldn't mask the stench of that comment. I pulled out great-grandfather's deed, original 1923 document, still in its protective sleeve. "Ma'am, I own the water rights to this entire lake." She glanced at the century-old paper like I'd just shown her a grocery list. "That old document doesn't supersede our community standards. This is a private, gated community with proper security protocols. The guard was already reaching for his radio. "Should I call the police for trespassing, Ms. Ashworth?" As I prepared to leave peacefully, I noticed something that made my surveyor's instincts kick in. Construction crews down by the shoreline, heavy equipment, concrete forms. They were building what looked like a new boat launch directly into my lake. They'd made their first mistake. They had no idea how many more they were about to make. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived that made my coffee taste like ash. "Cease and desist unauthorized lake access" screamed across legal letterhead that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. Cordelia had hired Pemberton, Walsh & Associates, the kind of law firm that charges $400 an hour to tell you why you can't breathe without their permission. 23 pages of pure legal intimidation, claiming the HOA had adverse possession rights after 40 years of continuous, open, and notorious use of my lake. Adverse possession. I'd studied enough property law during my surveying certification to know what that meant. Steal something long enough, and eventually the law says you can keep it. They were threatening $5,000 daily fines for any unauthorized lake use, and included a thick evidence packet of homeowner testimonies. Apparently, they'd been using their lake without interference since the 1980s. Without interference. Because my family hadn't been there to interfere. Time to visit my favorite place. The courthouse basement. That musty smell of old paper and broken dreams hit me as I descended into the archives, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying insects. But down there in those dusty file cabinets, I struck gold that would have made great-grandfather proud. The original 1923 land patent signed by Calvin Coolidge himself, granting Thomas Callahan all surface waters within described boundaries. Not lake access, not water privileges, all of it. From my surveying days, I'd learned that water rights and property ownership are like oil and vinegar. They might sit next to each other, but they don't mix unless specifically combined. You can own lakefront property without owning a single drop of the water lapping at your shore. Here's what Cordelia's expensive lawyers either missed or hoped I wouldn't find. The HOA's 1987 incorporation documents never mentioned water rights. Not once. Magnus Properties had sold lakefront lots but kept zero water claims for themselves, meaning they had nothing to transfer to the HOA. Every homeowner's deed included the same clause, subject to existing easements and water rights. They'd been buying lakefront property with a giant legal asterisk they'd never bothered to read. Martha, the county clerk who'd been filing documents since the Carter administration, found this situation absolutely hilarious. "Third water rights case this year," she chuckled, pulling out folders thick as dictionaries. "These HOAs think their gates give them ownership of everything inside the perimeter. Spoiler alert, they don't." I spent the afternoon documenting their illegal modifications. Every no trespassing sign GPS coordinated and photographed. Their unpermitted boat launch construction captured from multiple angles. They were digging into my lake bottom without water rights, environmental clearance, or basic construction permits. But the real discovery made my hands shake as I photographed the evidence. They'd been charging members $20,400 annually in lake access fees. 847 homeowners times $2,400 times 37 years. We're talking about $75 million in fees collected for access to property they never legally controlled. They'd built an entire business model on my family's water. I filed complaints with the county water board, requesting immediate cessation of all lake construction. Copied the editor at Mountain Valley News because government agencies move faster when reporters start asking questions. The sound of gravel crunching under expensive tires announced Cordelia's response the next morning. Emergency HOA meeting, called within 48 hours. A sympathetic homeowner leaked the agenda. Security concerns regarding outside agitator and legal options for protecting community assets. She'd started questioning neighbors about my suspicious activities, convinced I was planning sabotage. The paranoia was almost entertaining to watch from across the lake with my surveying binoculars. Cordelia also hired Sentinel Solutions, a residential community protection company. Fancy name for intimidation services targeting people who couldn't afford lawyers. Their newest security guard was Jake, a 19-year-old college sophomore who kept asking about surveying careers. "This gig just pays for textbooks," he confided during my morning documentation routine. "Ms. Ashworth called here 4 times yesterday, asking if you'd shown up. She seems really stressed about something." Meanwhile, she was distributing flyers. "Protect our property values from legal predators." 12 homeowners signed her petition, though I suspected most had no idea what they were actually supporting. The construction crews kept destroying lake bottom that had been pristine for a century, diesel exhaust choking mountain air that used to smell like heaven. Every day they worked was another day of evidence I was collecting. I had something Cordelia didn't understand. Patience born from 3 generations of surveyors who understood that the land always tells the truth, but only if you know how to listen. They thought one intimidating legal letter would send me running. Instead, they'd just provided documentation of 37 years of theft, wrapped in a nice legal bow and delivered to my doorstep with a return receipt. Cordelia was about to discover that threatening a surveyor with fraudulent documents was like challenging a bloodhound to a tracking contest. Cordelia's next move came with all the subtlety of a freight train decorated with passive-aggressive ribbon. Hand-delivered invitations appeared at every door in Serenity Shores, announcing an emergency community safety meeting for Saturday afternoon. The invitation featured a telephoto shot of me at the lake with text reading, "Protect our community from outside legal predators." From undesirable element to legal predator, I was moving up in the world. The meeting promised expert legal presentations and community protection strategies, which translated to, "We're hiring someone expensive to explain why you don't own what you obviously own." Saturday morning brought an unexpected knock on my cabin door. Griffin Morehouse from lot number 247 stood on my porch holding a manila folder and wearing the sheepish expression of a man carrying both bad news and good news. Retired attorney, early 70s, with the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of courtroom battles. "Mr. Callahan, I owe you an apology," he said, settling into my porch chair with a grunt. The morning air carried the sweet scent of pine sap warming in early sunlight. "I questioned these water rights when I bought my place in 2019. My realtor told me not to worry about old mining claims that had been properly resolved decades ago." He opened his folder, revealing copies of the same deed restrictions every homeowner had signed without reading. The same boilerplate language, the same legal loophole big enough to drive a boat launch through. "I should have dug deeper," Griffin continued, his reading glasses catching the sun. 37 years as a contracts attorney, and I let some kid in a polo shirt give me legal advice." That's when he explained something that made my coffee taste like victory. He'd spent Friday night researching Western water law, particularly the prior appropriation doctrine that governs who gets what when water's involved. First in time, first in right. Great-grandfather's 1923 claim didn't just predate the HOA, it trumped everything that came after by federal law. But here's the beautiful part. Adverse possession requires hostile, open, and notorious use of someone else's property. You can't steal something you never had legal right to touch. The HOA hadn't been establishing ownership rights for 37 years. They'd been trespassing. Griffin offered to review my documentation pro bono, partly from guilt and partly because he was fascinated by what he called the most slam-dunk water rights case in 4 decades of practice. Armed with legal firepower, I implemented what Griffin termed aggressive passive resistance. Starting Monday, I began daily lake visits at 6 a.m. sharp. Folding chair, coffee thermos, fishing gear, and surveying equipment spread out like I was conducting the world's most thorough property assessment. The crunch of my truck tires on gravel became Cordelia's personal alarm clock. Every interaction with security got documented. Timestamps, photos, GPS coordinates. Jake, the college kid guard, grew increasingly uncomfortable with his intimidation duties, especially after he started asking about surveying careers between awkward attempts at authority. "Ms. Ashworth called 3 times before 7 a.m., Jake confided during my second week. "She wanted to know if you were planning anything suspicious. I told her you were reading a book about fish." The smell of my campfire coffee mixing with mountain pine seemed to personally offend Cordelia, who started appearing every few days to glare at me through designer sunglasses that cost more than my truck. One crisp morning, she finally snapped. "This harassment has to stop," she announced, click-clacking across the rocky beach in heels that had no business near actual wilderness. Her hiking outfit looked fresh from an REI catalog, complete with tags probably still attached. I looked up from my thermos, steam rising in the cool air. "Ma'am, I'm sitting quietly on my own property. How exactly am I harassing anyone? This isn't your property." "Actually, it is." I gestured toward my surveying transit, set up to document exact boundary markers. "I'm mapping the precise coordinates described in my 1923 deed. Would you like to see the GPS readings?" Her face cycled through several color changes before settling on a shade that matched her burgundy BMW interior. That's when Deputy Martinez arrived, responding to her frantic call about ongoing trespassing and intimidation by a dangerous individual. I handed him my deed, Griffin's legal summary, and 3 weeks of documentation proving I'd been nothing but polite and lawful. The deputy studied everything, glanced at Cordelia, then back at me. "Ma'am, this gentleman has every legal right to be here. In fact, your HOA might want to consult with legal counsel about restricting access to someone else's property." Cordelia stormed off, her heels stabbing the earth like she was personally offended by its existence, muttering about incompetent law enforcement and people who don't understand community standards. But the real victory was happening behind the scenes. Someone had anonymously created Serenity Shores Truth on Facebook, posting leaked meeting minutes showing board confusion about water rights. 3 members had quietly resigned rather than face legal liability. The community was fracturing and Cordelia's iron grip was slipping. Sometimes the best strategy is giving your opponent enough rope while you document every knot they tie. Cordelia's desperation hit rock bottom when I arrived for my morning coffee to find construction crews dumping gravel directly onto my traditional lake access point. "Emergency shoreline stabilization," the foreman mumbled, avoiding eye contact. His hands were shaking slightly. Never a good sign when someone's explaining why they're destroying your property. HOA board authorized it for erosion control. Erosion control. The kind of erosion problem that mysteriously appeared the same week I started asserting my water rights. Massive decorative boulders now blocked vehicle access to the water, positioned with the surgical precision of someone trying to make permanent barriers look like landscaping. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust choked mountain air that had been pristine for a century, while bulldozers scraped away shoreline that had never needed stabilization before. But Cordelia had just made the mistake that would destroy her. My surveyor's training kicked in immediately. They'd bulldozed through protected wetland areas where 3 mountain streams fed the lake. Native cattails lay crushed under tire tracks, and fresh fill material had been dumped into federally protected habitat. I called State Fish and Wildlife from my truck, describing the environmental destruction in real time. Inspector Janet Kowalski arrived 90 minutes later with equipment that looked sophisticated enough to detect crimes from space. Her face went pale as she surveyed the damage, taking photographs and GPS readings with the methodical precision of someone building a federal case. $50,000 violation minimum, she told me, her voice tight with professional anger. 5,000 daily penalties until full restoration. Plus, I'm referring this to the Army Corps of Engineers for potential criminal charges. The sweet, earthy smell of crushed cattail stems would haunt my dreams for weeks. Here's what Cordelia didn't understand about environmental law. Corporate protection disappears when board members authorize willful destruction of protected habitat. Personal liability, personal assets, personal consequences. But the real game changer came from an unexpected ally. Tobias Creek, a grizzled fishing guide who'd worked these waters for 25 years, approached me that afternoon with an offer that would change everything. "Never seen any papers saying they owned this water," he drawled, his weathered hands gesturing toward the lake. "Always wondered what gave them the right to fence off God's creation." Tobias offered boat access for documentation, and his intimate knowledge of every underwater rock and hidden cove proved invaluable. From his pontoon boat, we photographed construction damage from angles the crews thought were safe from scrutiny. "That there's spawning habitat," he pointed out, showing me areas where gravel runoff was clouding previously crystal-clear shallows. Took Mother Nature 50 years to build that ecosystem. These folks destroyed it in 3 hours. 3 homeowners finally found courage to approach me privately, terrified of HOA retaliation but desperate to understand their legal exposure. One leaked that emergency board meetings were happening almost nightly, with environmental restoration costs triggering panic about special assessments exceeding $1,000 per household. The HOA's insurance company was already distancing themselves from willful environmental violations. That's when Cordelia made her most spectacular miscalculation yet. She contacted Channel 7 News, positioning herself as a victim of environmental terrorism and harassment by outside agitators. She invited reporter Helena Vasquez to film their peaceful community under siege. The interview was scheduled for Thursday morning. Environmental Inspector Kowalski's surprise compliance visit was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. They arrived simultaneously. Helena Vasquez showed up with a cameraman, immediately asking pointed questions about construction permits while Cordelia posed in her perfectly coordinated lakeside outfit. When Inspector Kowalski appeared mid-interview to serve federal violation notices, Cordelia's live television meltdown became legendary. "This is persecution," she screamed at the camera, while the inspector calmly explained wetlands law. "We're protecting our property values from predators and terrorists." The footage went viral within hours. Entitled HOA President Melts Down During Federal Environmental Investigation. 50,000 views in 2 days, mostly people sharing it with comments like, "Karen gets owned by Mother Nature's lawyers." But the real pressure was building behind closed doors. HOA meeting attendance exploded from 23 regulars to 89 furious homeowners demanding answers about legal fees exceeding $60,000 and climbing. Environmental fines were approaching 6 figures. Property values were dropping as negative publicity spread. A motion for no confidence against the entire board was scheduled for the annual meeting. The smell of desperation in those packed meeting rooms was thick enough to cut with my surveyor's machete. Security footage from that week shows Cordelia arriving at the lake multiple times, sitting in her BMW and staring at the water like she was trying to will my rights out of existence. She was running out of legal options, which meant she was about to start making illegal choices. And illegal choices leave evidence trails that surveyors are very, very good at following. The nuclear option was looking more inevitable every day. Griffin's phone call at 6:47 a.m. carried the breathless excitement of a treasure hunter who'd just struck gold. Ezra Courthouse. Now, I found something that doesn't just change the game, it ends it. 20 minutes later, I stood in the archives basement watching Griffin spread documents across a metal table like a general planning the final assault. The familiar smell of old paper and mildew mixed with something new, the electric scent of victory. "Look at this 1987 incorporation filing," Griffin said, his finger trembling slightly as he traced the crucial lines. "Magnus Properties never transferred water rights to the HOA because they never owned them. But here's the nuclear bomb." He pulled out a thick folder of financial records, pages rustling like whispered secrets in the fluorescent gloom. Lake access fees, $2,400 per homeowner per year for 37 consecutive years. The calculator on my phone couldn't process numbers that large. 847 homeowners times $2,400 times 37 years. We weren't looking at simple trespassing anymore. We were staring at approximately $75 million in systematic fraud. "Every monthly payment is a separate count," Griffin continued, his contract attorney instincts dissecting the legal carnage. "Ongoing fraudulent scheme means no statute of limitations. They've been selling access to your property for nearly 4 decades. The basement air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. My hands shook as I held the evidence. This wasn't just about a surveyor defending his inheritance anymore. This was about an entire community built on a foundation of theft, with hundreds of families who'd unknowingly paid for something that was never legally available for sale. "Jesus, Griffin, I could bankrupt every one of them." "You could," he agreed, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who'd just solved a particularly complex puzzle. Personal liability for board members who knew or should have known, restitution claims that would strip equity from every home, civil RICO charges for organized fraud. The taste of copper filled my mouth as the full implications hit me. I didn't just own the water rights anymore, I owned their entire way of life. Every dock, every boat launch, every lakefront barbecue existed because I allowed it. One lawsuit could turn 847 luxury homes into worthless boxes sitting beside water they couldn't touch. But staring at those documents, feeling the weight of my great-grandfather's legacy and the responsibility it carried, I realized something that surprised me. Destruction would be easy. Justice would be harder. These weren't all wealthy predators trying to steal from my family. Many were retirees who'd trusted real estate agents and HOA leadership to handle complexities they never understood. People who'd paid their fees believing they were buying legitimate lake access, not funding an elaborate theft operation. "What's your move?" Griffin asked, studying my face as moral complexity wrestled with righteous anger. The smart play was obvious. Leverage this discovery for maximum financial gain. Demand everything, destroy everyone, walk away wealthy from decades of their fraudulent payments. But sitting there, surrounded by evidence of institutional corruption, Breathing air thick with the possibility of either revenge or redemption, I chose a different path. I want Cordelia to hang herself publicly, I told Griffin. Let her dig deeper while we prepare the perfect resolution. Something that exposes the fraud, protects my rights, and saves the community from their corrupt leadership. Griffin's smile was sharp as a surveyor's blade. You want to be the hero who saves them from the villain they never recognized. At the annual meeting, with witnesses, cameras, and the whole truth. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes it's showing everyone exactly who deserves to be destroyed while you become the solution they never knew they needed. The nuclear option just evolved into something far more powerful. Justice with an audience. Griffin's law office smelled like expensive leather and successful victories, the kind of place where justice gets planned over coffee that costs more per pound than most people's monthly cable bill. We're not building a legal case, Griffin said, spreading our evidence across his mahogany conference table with the precision of a master chess player. We're orchestrating a public education event that happens to destroy Cordelia's credibility in front of everyone she's been trying to impress. Patricia Henfield arrived carrying boxes that clinked with glass sample bottles and rustled with environmental violation paperwork. Her expertise in wetlands law had already triggered federal interest. When EPA investigators start returning your calls within hours, you know someone's in serious trouble. But our strategy wasn't about legal overwhelming force. It was about surgical precision, like using a surveyor's laser to mark exactly where someone's fence crossed onto your property. From 3 decades of resolving boundary disputes, I'd learned that the most effective way to end conflicts is letting everyone see exactly where the real lines are drawn. No arguing, no interpretation, just facts so clear that denial becomes impossible. Our plan had 3 phases, each designed to let Cordelia dig her own grave while we prepared to offer the community a ladder out of the hole. Phase 1 was documentation overload. Griffin had filed complaints with more agencies than Cordelia probably knew existed. State Attorney General for Consumer Fraud, Environmental Protection Agency for Wetlands Destruction, County Water Board for unauthorized construction, and IRS for questioning tax-exempt status while collecting fraudulent fees. Here's what most people don't understand about government investigations. Agencies don't like looking stupid in front of other agencies. When multiple departments start investigating the same organization simultaneously, they compete to find the worst violations. It becomes a bureaucratic feeding frenzy. Phase 2 was strategic patience, while Cordelia continued making mistakes. Environmental fines were accumulating like interest on a payday loan, 6 figures and climbing with daily penalties that would make a loan shark blush. HOA legal expenses had blown past $80,000, triggering emergency special assessments that were making homeowners question everything. But here's the beautiful part about environmental violations. Corporate protection evaporates when board members personally authorize destruction of federally protected habitat. Cordelia's signature was on work orders that could strip equity from her own lakefront mansion. Patricia had prepared a presentation showing how environmental laws create personal liability that pierces corporate shields like paper. When federal prosecutors get involved, she explained, organizing photos of destroyed wetlands, HOA bylaws become about as protective as a screen door on a submarine. Phase 3 was the grand finale, public revelation at the annual meeting with maximum witnesses. From my surveying trailer, I'd assembled a presentation system that would make NASA jealous. Digital evidence stored in multiple cloud systems, trail cameras providing 24/7 documentation, time-lapse photography showing environmental destruction in fast forward, and GPS mapping that proved decades of trespassing with surveyor-grade precision. The annual meeting was scheduled for Saturday, October 14th. Perfect timing. All homeowners required to attend for budget votes. Helena Vasquez already confirmed to cover the story. Environmental inspectors scheduled to present violation findings, and sheriff's deputies providing security that would double as law enforcement witnesses. Meanwhile, I maintained my morning lake ritual with the dedication of a monk performing daily prayers. 6 a.m. coffee, surveying equipment setup, polite documentation of every interaction. The crunch of gravel under my truck tires had become Cordelia's personal torture device, and her sleep-deprived paranoia was becoming a neighborhood entertainment. Jake, the college security guard, had given up any pretense of intimidation and started bringing environmental science textbooks to work. Smart kid, he'd figured out which side of history he wanted to be on. Ms. Ashworth called 8 times before noon yesterday, he confided, steam rising from his coffee cup in the crisp morning air. She wanted to know if you were planning any suspicious activities for the meeting. I told her you were mostly just feeding ducks and reading poetry. The smell of autumn leaves mixing with lake water carried the promise of change. October mornings in the mountains have a clarity that cuts through bullshit like a laser through fog. Perfect weather for revealing 37 years of hidden truth. Cordelia was spiraling into increasingly desperate measures, which meant increasingly documented mistakes. She'd started interrogating neighbors about their loyalty to community values, creating the kind of paranoid atmosphere that turns neighbors into enemies. 5 board members had now quietly resigned rather than face personal environmental liability. The HOA was operating with skeleton leadership while facing maximum legal exposure from multiple federal agencies. Everything was aligned for what Griffin called controlled demolition of institutional corruption. October 14th was approaching like Christmas morning for adults who'd been very, very good all year. Cordelia had spent nearly 4 decades building an empire on my family's stolen foundation. Time to show 847 homeowners exactly how their trusted leadership had been systematically robbing them while destroying the pristine environment they'd paid premium prices to preserve. The House of Cards was about to meet a hurricane named Truth. Cordelia's desperation reached fever pitch when she discovered my morning routine and decided to weaponize construction equipment as psychological warfare. I arrived at 5:30 a.m. to find emergency dock maintenance crews setting up directly in my usual coffee spot, complete with diesel generators, floodlights bright enough to illuminate a football stadium, and power tools that could wake the dead 3 counties over. The foreman, a weathered guy named Mike Peterson, looked genuinely uncomfortable as he explained the situation. "Ma'am says we gotta start early for safety reasons," he said, gesturing helplessly at equipment positioned with surgical precision to make my life miserable. Something about preventing interference with community operations. Community operations, at 5:30 in the morning, right where I'd been peacefully drinking coffee for 6 weeks. But Mike's discomfort told a story that would soon become crucial evidence. "Look, I don't know what's going on between you and the HOA lady," he said quietly, glancing toward Cordelia's BMW parked at a safe distance where she could supervise the harassment without getting her designer shoes dirty. "But this feels wrong, you know?" That's when Mike dropped a bombshell that would later prove invaluable in court. Cordelia had offered his crew a cash bonus, off the books, no paperwork, for making my daily visits as difficult as possible. She'd specifically instructed them to position equipment to block my access, run generators during that trespasser's coffee time, and report any suspicious activities directly to her personal cell phone. Mike showed me the text messages. Screenshots of Cordelia's increasingly unhinged instructions, including gems like, "Make sure he understands he's not welcome," and "Use whatever noise is necessary to discourage loitering." The sweet smell of morning pine was obliterated by diesel exhaust that burned my nostrils and coated everything with greasy film. But every roaring generator was creating documented evidence of harassment that would strengthen my eventual legal case. Environmental violations were escalating beyond anyone's control. State Inspector Kowalski arrived unannounced to find active construction violating the previous cease and desist order. The fines jumped to $127,000 plus mandatory restoration costs that would require specialized environmental contractors charging premium rates. Criminal charges were now officially possible for willful destruction of protected habitat. But the real pressure was building in the community itself. Special assessments had increased to $1,340 per homeowner just for legal and environmental costs, with more increases inevitable. 12 homeowners had already put their properties up for sale rather than pay, creating a mini real estate crisis that was tanking property values. The HOA was facing potential bankruptcy, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, my strategic patience was paying dividends. I continued my morning routine despite the harassment, documenting every violation with GPS time-stamped photos, audio recordings of Cordelia's shouted instructions to contractors, and video evidence of equipment deliberately positioned to obstruct my legal property access. Never responded to provocation, always remained polite to workers who were obviously uncomfortable with their orders, and built sympathy among everyone who witnessed the increasingly desperate harassment campaign. Mike Peterson became an unexpected ally when Cordelia pushed too far. "She wanted us to accidentally damage your truck," he told me during a quiet moment when she'd stepped away to harangue someone on her phone. Told us to position the excavator so your vehicle couldn't get out, then claim it was coincidental equipment placement. That crossed the line from harassment into potential criminal territory. Mike started documenting Cordelia's illegal instructions for his own legal protection, creating a paper trail that would later prove conspiracy to commit property damage and intentional interference with legal property rights. The sound of Cordelia's heels stabbing gravel became a morning alarm clock for the entire neighborhood. She'd arrive at dawn, position herself like a general commanding troops, and spend hours directing what could only be described as organized harassment disguised as routine maintenance. Her paranoia was becoming visible to everyone. 3 more board members resigned, citing concerns about leadership direction and personal legal liability. The HOA was operating with minimal oversight while facing maximum legal exposure from multiple government agencies. Helena Vasquez published a follow-up article about the environmental violations, including photos of Cordelia directing construction activities in federally protected wetlands. The headline, "HOA President Doubles Down on Environmental Destruction," was shared over 8,000 times on social media. Property values had dropped 8% in 3 weeks due to negative publicity and legal uncertainty. The exclusive paradise that homeowners had paid premium prices to join was becoming a cautionary tale about institutional overreach. But Cordelia wasn't done. Her next escalation would prove that desperate people make increasingly stupid choices, and stupid choices create permanent evidence that builds bulletproof legal cases. She was about to cross lines that would transform harassment into criminal activity, all while being documented by someone who understood exactly how evidence works in court. The annual meeting was 2 weeks away, and Cordelia was systematically destroying every remaining shred of her credibility, while I continued being the reasonable person trying to peacefully enjoy my inherited property. Sometimes the best strategy is just standing still while your opponent runs headfirst into every possible legal obstacle. Cordelia's final gambit was a masterclass in how to destroy yourself using social media and absolute desperation. It started with fake Facebook accounts. "Ezra Callahan is a dangerous predator targeting our peaceful community," read one post from concerned Serenity resident. Another account, "Lakefront Property Owner," shared evidence of my unstable behavior and threats against innocent families. The posts multiplied like a virus, each one more unhinged than the last, painting me as everything from a financial scammer to a potential terrorist who was using legal technicalities to steal from hardworking families. But Cordelia made a critical mistake. She wasn't nearly as clever with technology as she thought. Helena Vasquez, the reporter who'd been tracking this story, received anonymous tips about the fake accounts from someone in the community who'd grown disgusted with the harassment campaign. A basic digital investigation traced every single fake profile back to the same IP address, Cordelia's home internet connection. Helena's follow-up article, "HOA President Creates Fake Social Media Accounts to Defame Property Owner," included screenshots showing the account's creation timeline, posting patterns, and IP forensics that read like a digital fingerprint pointing directly at Cordelia's lakefront mansion. The story went viral regionally within hours. Serenity Shores, Karen began trending on Twitter, with people sharing the most ridiculous fake posts alongside commentary about entitled HOA presidents who've completely lost their minds. But the community revolt was even more dramatic than the media attention. Emergency meetings were being called by homeowners, not the board. 89 residents had signed a petition demanding Cordelia's immediate resignation and a complete audit of HOA finances. The Facebook group Serenity Shores Truth now had over 300 members sharing leaked documents and expressing outrage about mounting legal costs. Quorum was being lost at official meetings because board members simply refused to show up, terrified of personal liability for environmental violations and increasingly convinced that Cordelia had lost her mind completely. The smell of desperation was thick as diesel exhaust during those packed emergency meetings. Homeowners were threatening to withhold HOA dues until leadership changed, which would trigger immediate bankruptcy and make individual homeowners personally liable for environmental fines and legal costs. The community was fracturing along lines that made neighborhood barbecues feel like peace negotiations. Meanwhile, I was putting finishing touches on my presentation for the annual meeting, now just days away. Griffin had assembled a visual timeline showing 37 years of fraudulent water rights claims, complete with financial calculations that would make every homeowner simultaneously furious and terrified. Environmental violations were documented with before and after photography that looked like evidence from an environmental crime scene. Patricia had prepared federal law presentations explaining how environmental destruction carried personal liability that could strip board members' personal assets, including their own lakefront homes. But my secret weapon was Mike Peterson, the contractor who'd been documenting Cordelia's increasingly illegal instructions. His testimony about cash bonuses for harassment, orders to damage my property, and conspiracy to obstruct legal access would provide eyewitness evidence of criminal behavior. The county sheriff's department had agreed to provide security for the meeting, which meant law enforcement witnesses for everything that happened. Helena Vasquez was confirmed to attend with a photographer, turning the annual meeting into the most documented HOA proceeding in Colorado history. Environmental Inspector Kowalski would present her findings about willful wetlands destruction, adding federal authority to what was shaping up to be Cordelia's public trial. 3 days before the meeting, Cordelia made her most spectacular mistake yet. She attempted to lock the community center early, claiming security concerns about outside agitators disrupting community proceedings. When Sheriff Deputy Martinez arrived to investigate reports of HOA officials preventing legal access to a public meeting, he found Cordelia physically blocking the entrance while screaming about protecting our community from terrorist infiltration. The incident was recorded by multiple homeowners' cell phones and immediately uploaded to the Serenity Shores Truth Facebook group. Watching a suburban HOA president have a complete mental breakdown while being gently but firmly moved away from a door by a patient sheriff's deputy was the kind of content that makes local news stations cancel other programming. The community center was packed beyond legal capacity on October 14th. 347 homeowners plus media, environmental officials, law enforcement, and enough folding chairs borrowed from neighboring communities to seat a small political convention. The tension in that room was so thick you could have surveyed it with precision instruments. Cordelia arrived in her BMW like she was attending a coronation instead of her own professional execution, apparently convinced that one final presentation would somehow restore her credibility and authority. She had no idea that everyone in that room had already seen evidence that would destroy not just her presidency, but potentially her personal freedom. The annual meeting was about to become the most satisfying public accountability session in HOA history. Sometimes justice isn't just served cold, it's served with witnesses, cameras, and federal law enforcement taking notes. The Serenity Shores Community Center had never seen anything like it. 347 homeowners packed into a space designed for maybe half that number, folding chairs borrowed from 3 neighboring communities, and enough media equipment to cover a presidential election. The air buzzed with nervous energy and the kind of anticipation that comes right before someone gets what's been coming to them for a very long time. Cordelia arrived fashionably late in her pristine BMW, apparently under the delusion that she was attending some kind of victory celebration, rather than her own professional funeral. She'd prepared what she called definitive presentations about protecting community assets from legal predators, complete with PowerPoint slides and charts that would have been impressive if they weren't based on 37 years of systematic fraud. I sat quietly in the back row, my evidence binders organized with surveyor's precision, watching Cordelia take the microphone like she was accepting an Academy Award. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had absolutely no idea how much trouble she was in. "Tonight, we end the harassment that has plagued our peaceful community for months." The irony was so thick you could have measured it with a surveyor's chain. For 20 minutes, Cordelia rambled about outside agitators, frivolous legal challenges, and protecting property values through strong leadership. She presented falsified documents attempting to prove HOA ownership of water rights, completely ignoring the federal laws that made such ownership impossible. Several homeowners walked out in disgust. Others started openly laughing when she claimed the environmental violations were minor technical issues blown out of proportion by radical environmentalists. That's when Environmental Inspector Kowalski stood up. "Ma'am, I need to correct several factual errors in your presentation," she announced, her official credentials giving weight to words that would crush Cordelia's narrative. "The violations documented at this site constitute willful destruction of federally protected wetlands. We're We're talking about criminal charges, not technical issues. The room went silent, except for the sound of Helena Vasquez's photographer capturing every expression of shock and horror. Inspector Kowalski presented timeline documentation showing escalating environmental destruction, fines exceeding $200,000, and federal referrals for potential criminal prosecution. Every homeowner in that room suddenly understood they weren't just facing special assessments, they were potentially complicit in environmental crimes. Then Griffin stood up. "I'd like the community to see some additional documentation," he announced, walking to the front with the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms. Specifically, evidence about the lake access fees this HOA has been collecting. The projector screen filled with financial records showing 37 years of fraudulent collections. $75 million in fees charged for access to property the HOA never owned and had no legal right to provide. The mathematical reality hit the room like a physical blow. Every homeowner who'd paid those fees had grounds for full restitution. The HOA faced potential bankruptcy that would make every member personally liable for environmental restoration costs. That's when Cordelia completely lost control. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed, jumping up from her chair and pointing wildly at Griffin, me, and various homeowners who dared to ask questions. "You're all working together to destroy our community." She attempted to grab the microphone from Griffin, leading to an undignified struggle that was captured by multiple cameras and immediately uploaded to social media. Sheriff Deputy Martinez had seen enough. "Ma'am, you're disrupting a lawful assembly," he announced, approaching Cordelia with the patient professionalism of someone who'd dealt with plenty of entitled people having public meltdowns. "I need you to calm down, or I'll have to escort you outside." "You can't arrest me. I'm the president of this HOA. I'm protecting property values." "Ma'am, you're under arrest for disturbing the peace." The sight of Cordelia being handcuffed in front of 300 witnesses while screaming about conspiracies and property rights was everything the community needed to see. Flashbulbs captured every moment of her complete mental breakdown. But the real moment of justice came when I finally stood up. "If I could have everyone's attention," I said, my voice carrying easily through the stunned silence that followed Cordelia's removal. "I'm Ezra Callahan, and I own the water rights to Lake Serenity." I placed great-grandfather's 1923 deed on the projector, letting everyone see the federal document that had started this entire conflict. I could demand full restitution for 37 years of fraudulent fees. I could shut down lake access permanently. I could pursue criminal charges against board members who knowingly collected money for services they couldn't legally provide. The room was so quiet you could hear pine needles falling on the roof. Instead, I'm offering a solution that benefits everyone. I presented my proposal, a 99-year community lease for $1 annually, with conditions including environmental restoration, community fishing access, and public recreation days. The vote was unanimous, 347-0. For the first time in months, Lake Serenity felt peaceful again. 6 months later, Lake Serenity looked like something from a nature magazine. The environmental restoration had transformed destroyed wetlands into a showcase of what happens when people work together instead of fighting over stolen property. Native cattails swayed in morning breezes that no longer carried diesel exhaust, and the water ran so clear you could see granite boulders 30 feet down. 127 volunteers had shown up for the first community cleanup day. Homeowners who'd been terrified of me 6 months earlier were now bringing coffee and homemade cookies while we replanted vegetation that Cordelia's illegal construction had destroyed. The smell of fresh pine mixed with rich soil and the kind of satisfaction that comes from fixing something that was broken for way too long. Cordelia's legal troubles had resolved about as well as you'd expect for someone who'd been arrested on live television while screaming about conspiracies. She pleaded guilty to environmental violations, paid $50,000 in fines, and quietly moved away after selling her lakefront mansion to cover civil lawsuit settlements. 3 former board members faced personal liability for fraud, eventually settling out of court for amounts that made their lawyers very wealthy and their retirement accounts considerably lighter. But the real victory was what the community built from the ashes of institutional corruption. The Serenity Shores Environmental Education Center now occupies the old HOA office building, completely renovated with solar panels and interpretive displays about mountain lake ecology. Local schools bring students for field trips, learning about water rights, environmental protection, and what happens when communities choose cooperation over conflict. We established an annual $5,000 scholarship for students studying environmental science, funded by what we now call justice fees. The money recovered from Cordelia's fraudulent schemes. 6 kids from the surrounding area have already received scholarships, including Jake, the former security guard who's now studying environmental law at Colorado State. The community fishing pier was built with wheelchair accessibility and includes covered pavilions where families can picnic while teaching kids to cast lines into water so pristine it qualifies as drinking quality. Monthly public access days bring fishing guides, environmental groups, and families from surrounding communities who'd been locked out for decades. Property values didn't just recover, they increased 12% once word spread about the collaborative resolution and environmental restoration. Turns out, people will pay premium prices to live in a community that's famous for doing the right thing instead of notorious for HOA corruption. I built a modest cabin on my inherited property, positioning it to overlook the lake that great-grandfather first saw in 1923. Every morning I drink coffee on a porch that faces water so peaceful it looks like glass, listening to loons call across valleys that echo with exactly the same sounds Thomas Callahan heard a century ago. Griffin Morehouse serves as the community's volunteer legal advisor, helping draft template agreements for other communities dealing with similar water rights conflicts. We've consulted on 12 cases across 3 states, helping people resolve disputes through collaboration instead of litigation. Patricia Henfield has turned our environmental restoration into a case study used in law schools nationwide, proving that creative legal solutions can transform conflicts into community success stories. The HOA was completely restructured with term limits, financial oversight, and transparent communication that would have made Cordelia break out in hives. Monthly meetings now focus on actual community issues like road maintenance and snow removal instead of power trips and fraudulent fee schemes. Helena Vasquez won a regional journalism award for her investigative series, which became required reading in a documentary film class at the University of Colorado. She still stops by occasionally to check on the restoration progress and fish from the community pier. But the best part is what didn't happen. No lawsuits bankrupted innocent homeowners. No families lost houses because of board members' crimes. No environmental damage became permanent. A community that had been divided by fear and corruption found a way to heal itself through truth and collaboration. Great-grandfather's legacy isn't just protected. It's thriving in ways he never could have imagined.